The Terminus Security Nexus had achieved something that most galactic institutions could only dream of: 347 years of flawless operation without a single security breach, classification error, or bureaucratic embarrassment. It was the kind of record that made other facilities weep with envy and caused insurance companies to offer premium rates with genuine enthusiasm. The station's crown jewel, the Absolute Certainty Scanner, had earned its grandiose name through the simple expedient of never being wrong about anything, ever. Chief Security Officer Zenth Kara took considerable pride in this fact, though pride was perhaps too mild a term. The hegemony officer had elevated the appreciation of bureaucratic perfection to something approaching religious devotion, complete with daily rituals that involved polishing the scanner's chrome housing and reciting its technical specifications like a mantra. His six-limbed frame moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades turning the mundane act of security clearance into an art form. Today marked the beginning of the annual Intergalactic Military Academy Exchange Program, an event that brought together the finest military minds from across known space for what the promotional materials cheerfully described as cultural enrichment through tactical diversity. In practice, this meant several weeks of young warriors from different species trying to prove their superiority, while their instructors pretended that competition was entirely secondary to education. It was, by all accounts, the sort of diplomatic exercise that looked wonderful in press releases and caused security chiefs to develop stress-related ailments. The morning had begun with typical efficiency. Cadets from the Corthani Energy Academy had materialized through the scanner in their characteristic fashion, beings of pure electromagnetic force temporarily contained within environmental suits that made them look like walking Tesla coils with delusions of grandeur. Their weapons were extensions of their own energy matrices, requiring no external hardware and producing scanner readings that resembled abstract art performed by a mathematician with synesthesia. The Absolute Certainty Scanner had catalogued each cadet's capabilities with its usual mechanical precision: plasma projection, electromagnetic pulse generation, and the ability to cause power failures in nearby electronics simply by existing too enthusiastically. Next came the delegation from the Velthari Collective War College, whose insectoid representatives moved in perfect synchronization that was either mesmerizing or deeply unsettling, depending on one's tolerance for hive mind behavior. Their weapons were biological modifications, chitinous projectile launchers grown from their own exoskeletons, acid sacs that could dissolve through most known materials, and pheromone dispensers capable of inducing temporary madness in carbon-based life forms. The scanner processed each modification with mechanical indifference, adding new entries to its comprehensive database of things that could ruin your day. The Mor'danian crystal warriors provided their own unique challenges, being silicon-based life forms whose bodies were living weapons capable of reshaping themselves into various implements of destruction. Watching a Mor'danian cadet transform their arm into a vibroblade while maintaining casual conversation about the weather was the sort of experience that made organic beings question their life choices. The scanner cataloged their crystalline matrices, noted their resonance frequencies, and calculated the probability of structural collapse under various stress conditions with the same enthusiasm it brought to all its tasks. Each scan proceeded with clockwork precision, generating detailed reports that would have made paranoid security officials weep with joy. Threat assessments, capability matrices, recommended containment protocols. The Absolute Certainty Scanner provided everything needed to classify, categorize, and control any potential security risk. It was, as Zenth Kara frequently reminded anyone who would listen, the most sophisticated threat detection system ever created, which made the arrival of the human delegation all the more interesting. The Terra Military Institute had sent a relatively modest contingent compared to the other academies, 12 cadets and 1 instructor who looked like she had seen enough combat to qualify as a geological formation. Instructor Daniels carried herself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had survived situations that would have required extensive therapy for most species, while her charges displayed the peculiar mixture of alertness and casual irreverence that seemed characteristic of human military personnel. Their equipment was refreshingly primitive by galactic standards: projectile weapons that threw small pieces of metal at high velocity, chemical explosives that operated on principles unchanged since their species had discovered combustion, and communication devices that accomplished their tasks without achieving sentience or developing personality disorders. It was all charmingly straightforward, like encountering a functional mechanical clock in a museum of quantum chronometers. The first few cadets passed through the scanner without incident, producing readings that would have been considered quaint if they hadn't been so unexpectedly effective. Human military gear might lack the sophisticated elegance of energy weapons or the artistic flair of biomodifications, but it possessed a brutal simplicity that was oddly compelling. The scanner cataloged each item with something approaching relief finally: weapons that did exactly what they appeared to do without requiring advanced degrees in theoretical physics to understand. Then Cadet Alexis Chen stepped into the scanning chamber. Chen was, by any reasonable standard, completely unremarkable. Average height for a human, standard military bearing, with the kind of face that would blend seamlessly into any crowd. Her equipment matched the pattern established by her colleague's ballistic rifle, sidearm, standard field gear that had seen enough use to suggest competence without indicating any particular specialization. She approached the scanner with the patient resignation of someone who had endured bureaucratic processing before and expected to survive the experience. The absolute certainty scanner began its routine analysis and promptly suffered what could only be described as an existential crisis. The scanning beam, usually a brief sweep of coherent light lasting no more than a few seconds, lingered on Chen like a spotlight operated by someone having second thoughts. The display screens that normally showed clear classifications and threat assessments began cycling through readings that made progressively less sense with each iteration. "Curious," murmured Dr. Mor'dun, the station's chief xenobiological analyst, peering at the displays with the sort of scientific interest that usually preceded either breakthrough discoveries or catastrophic accidents. "The threat assessment appears to be fluctuating between minimal and unprecedented." Zenthkara's 6 arms moved in patterns of increasing agitation as he attempted to restore normal operations. "Minor calibration discrepancy. The system has been running for 18 consecutive hours processing exotic energy beings. Probably needs a brief reset." The reset took 4 minutes and accomplished absolutely nothing useful. The moment the scanner reacquired Chen, the displays resumed their schizophrenic dance between contradictory readings. The weapon classification system cycled through categories at speeds that would have impressed a gambling addict, while the threat analysis oscillated between harmless bystander and potentially catastrophic. "Is there a problem?" Instructor Daniels inquired, approaching with the careful neutrality of someone familiar with bureaucratic delays, but prepared to escalate matters if patience proved insufficient. "Minor technical anomaly," Zenthkara replied with the strained politeness of a professional dealing with equipment that was making him look incompetent in front of important visitors. "Should be resolved momentarily." But momentarily stretched into minutes, and minutes accumulated into what was beginning to resemble a genuine crisis. The scanner remained frozen in place, its sophisticated sensors locked onto Chen with the intensity of a predator that couldn't decide whether it was looking at prey or competition. Emergency protocols activated automatically, filling the chamber with warning lights that painted everything in shades of amber urgency. Word of the malfunction spread through the station with the efficiency that only truly embarrassing failures could achieve. Representatives from the various military academies began gathering, their diplomatic immunity badges glinting as they observed the proceedings with the sort of polite interest that concealed profound amusement at others' misfortunes. "Most irregular," commented High Strategist Velthos of the Korthani Delegation, his energy form crackling with what might have been concern or barely suppressed laughter. "The absolute certainty scanner has processed our people without difficulty. Perhaps the issue lies with the subject rather than the system." Chen, still trapped within the scanning chamber, offered a helpful suggestion. "Maybe if I try standing differently. Sometimes these things are finicky about posture." The comment produced a ripple of harmonic frequencies from the Mor'danian delegation that translated roughly as polite skepticism mixed with crystalline amusement. The idea that the galaxy's most sophisticated scanning system could be confused by posture struck them as either deeply naive or subtly insulting. Dr. Mor'dun had begun running independent scans with portable equipment, his scientific curiosity thoroughly engaged by readings that violated several fundamental principles of threat assessment. "Fascinating," he muttered, cross-referencing data streams that seemed determined to contradict each other. The subject registers as simultaneously armed and unarmed, threatening and benign, predictable and utterly chaotic. "That's impossible," declared Coordinator Hykesal of the Velthari Collective, her compound eyes reflecting the amber warning lights in patterns that suggested deep skepticism. "Threat analysis is binary. Either a subject poses danger or does not. There cannot be simultaneous contradictory states. Tell that to the scanner," Chen observed from within the chamber, her tone carrying the sort of patient amusement that made authority figures question their life choices. As the hours accumulated and the diplomatic implications began to compound, Dr. Mor'dun found himself studying not just the sensor data but the human herself. Chen remained remarkably composed throughout the entire ordeal, occasionally engaging in conversation with the technicians or offering observations about the equipment that demonstrated an unsettling familiarity with technology she theoretically shouldn't understand. "Cadet Chen," Mor'dun called out during one of the many attempts to recalibrate the system, "what exactly is your area of specialization within human military doctrine?" "Adaptive problem solving," Chen replied without hesitation. "I suppose you could call me a specialist in non-specialization. Could you elaborate on that concept?" Chen considered the question with the sort of careful thought that suggested she was translating concepts that didn't translate well. "Human military training emphasizes flexibility over rigid doctrine. We learn foundational skills, but the expectation is that we'll encounter situations requiring improvisation. My particular talent seems to be finding solutions that work even when they shouldn't." "And how do you approach these improvisational solutions?" "Usually by ignoring conventional wisdom," Chen said with a slight smile. "Most problems have solutions that everyone avoids because they seem wrong, impossible, or inappropriate. I specialize in the solutions that make people uncomfortable." That response triggered something approaching revelation in Dr. Mor'dun's analytical mind. He began reviewing the scanner data with new perspective, looking for patterns that had been invisible until he changed his fundamental assumptions about what he was observing. "Instructor Daniels," he called out, his excitement building as theoretical frameworks shifted in his mind. "I need to understand something about human military philosophy." Daniels approached with the cautious interest of someone who had learned that scientific breakthroughs involving her species rarely ended well for anyone. "What do you need to know?" "Your military doctrine. How much operational flexibility do individual soldiers possess during combat situations?" "Depends on the specific circumstances," Daniels replied, "but generally speaking, we train people to think independently. Command structure matters, but if a soldier identifies a better approach to accomplishing the mission objectives, they're expected to adapt their methods accordingly. And this adaptation occurs in real time, during actual combat operations." "That's the whole point," Daniels said with growing puzzlement. "Static doctrine gets people killed when situations change. We train adaptability as a core military skill." Mor'dun nodded slowly, his theory crystallizing into something approaching certainty. "And individuals like Cadet Chen, they represent the extreme end of this adaptability." "Chen?" Daniels glanced at the human in question, who was now examining the scanner's internal mechanisms with the sort of professional interest that made technicians nervous. "Chen's one of those soldiers who makes commanding officers simultaneously grateful and terrified. Put her in an impossible situation, and she'll find a solution that nobody anticipated and half the rulebook says shouldn't work." "Remarkable," Mor'dun breathed, then turned to address the assembled crowd of increasingly frustrated diplomats and military representatives. "Distinguished colleagues, I believe I understand what we're witnessing here. The various delegations quieted, sensing that they were about to receive either a brilliant explanation or a spectacular demonstration of academic failure. In Mor'dun's experience, the distinction was often clearer in retrospect than in the moment. The absolute certainty scanner, he began, gesturing toward the still frozen device, operates by identifying and classifying threats according to established parameters. It recognizes weapon systems, combat modifications, and tactical capabilities based on comprehensive databases of known military technologies. Obviously, interjected Velthos with barely contained impatience. That's why it's called the absolute certainty scanner. It provides absolute certainty about threat classifications. Precisely, Mor'dun agreed, his excitement building. But what happens when the scanner encounters something that doesn't fit any established classification? Something that represents a completely new category of military asset? He paused for dramatic effect, a habit he'd acquired from too many academic conferences where tenure decisions hung on the ability to make mundane discoveries sound revolutionary. The scanner hasn't malfunctioned, he announced with the satisfaction of someone overturning conventional wisdom. It's functioning perfectly. It has identified a military asset unlike anything in its databases, a self-modifying, adaptive weapon system that operates in real time. The silence that followed suggested either profound understanding or complete confusion. Mor'dun chose to interpret it optimistically. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary energy matrices, he continued, the weapon system the scanner has detected is Cadet Chen's mind. That's preposterous, declared Heixal, her compound eyes cycling through patterns that indicated deep skepticism mixed with professional insult. Organic neural networks are not weapons. They're simply biological processing systems. Under normal circumstances, certainly, Mor'dun agreed. But human neural networks appear to operate according to different principles. The scanner is detecting something unprecedented, a biological system that functions as an adaptive combat platform capable of real-time modification and creative problem-solving. He turned to address Chen directly, who was listening to this explanation with the sort of detached interest that suggested she was evaluating its accuracy rather than being surprised by its content. Your brain, Cadet, registers as a weapon system that can modify its own operational parameters in response to changing tactical requirements. From the scanner's perspective, you're not carrying weapons, you are a weapon that designs itself as needed. Chen considered this assessment with the careful thought of someone evaluating a job description. That's either deeply flattering or profoundly disturbing. Probably both, Instructor Daniels observed dryly. But it does explain some things about our military effectiveness that other species find puzzling. The implications began propagating through the assembled crowd like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The energy beings of the Cortheni delegation began radiating frequencies that suggested intensive discussion, while the crystalline Mor'danians emitted harmonic resonances that indicated deep contemplation mixed with growing unease. This is unprecedented, declared General Zix then of the Velthari War College, his insectoid features radiating professional concern. If human minds function as adaptive weapon systems, what does that mean for military academy protocols? How do we classify combatants whose primary weapon is unpredictability? That's an excellent question, Chen said helpfully. Though I should point out that unpredictability works both ways. We're just as likely to surprise ourselves as anyone else. But surely there must be limitations, protested Coordinator Vexlin of the Mor'danian Crystal Warriors, her silicon-based form shifting through configurations that suggested anxiety mixed with scientific curiosity. No weapon system can be infinitely adaptable. True, Daniels acknowledged, but the limitations are more philosophical than tactical. We're constrained by human nature, not by equipment specifications. And what exactly does human nature constrain you from doing? Inquired Dr. Mor'dun, his scientific curiosity fully engaged. Daniels considered the question with the careful thought of someone who had spent years trying to explain human military doctrine to species that found it fundamentally incomprehensible. Mostly, she said finally, it prevents us from being predictable. We're not constrained by doctrine or tradition or established procedure. We're constrained by the simple fact that humans don't like being told that something is impossible. The assembled representatives found themselves facing a conceptual challenge that cut to the heart of military philosophy. Every known species had developed combat doctrines based on predictable capabilities, established procedures, and reliable performance parameters. The idea of combatants whose primary tactical advantage was their refusal to accept limitations challenged fundamental assumptions about how warfare functioned. After several minutes of multi-species consultation that involved energy discharges, harmonic frequencies, pheromone releases, and at least one crystalline reconfiguration that made everyone's eyes water, High Strategist Velthos stepped forward as the unofficial spokesperson for the group. The Intergalactic Military Academy Exchange Program, he announced with the formal precision of someone making decisions that would affect diplomatic relations for decades, recognizes humans as unprecedented strategic assets, requiring modified classification protocols. What does that mean in practical terms? Asked Instructor Daniels. It means, Velthos replied with what might have been resignation or admiration, that human cadets will be classified as self-directing adaptive combat systems rather than conventional military personnel. That's going to look interesting on our service records. Chen observed from within the scanner chamber. Better than system-breaking anomaly. Daniels pointed out. Zenthkara, who had been watching this entire exchange with the growing realization that his perfect security system had been defeated by biological evolution, finally managed to find his voice. So, do we process her through security clearance? Dr. Mor'dun consulted his readings one final time, cross-referencing data streams that had stabilized into something approaching consistency now that everyone understood what they were measuring. The scanner's final assessment, he announced, classifies Cadet Chen as simultaneously the most dangerous and most cooperative individual it has ever encountered. I believe the appropriate response is to process her through security, and then monitor the results with scientific interest. Sounds reasonable, Chen said, stepping out of the scanner chamber with obvious relief. Though I should probably mention that I'm just here to learn about alien military techniques. The dangerous part is entirely optional. The Absolute Certainty Scanner, finally released from its philosophical crisis, resumed normal operations with what sounded distinctly like electronic relief. The status lights returned to their normal cool blue, and the displays showed readings that made sense according to conventional parameters. As the various delegations dispersed and normal Academy operations prepared to resume, Zenthkara found himself contemplating the day's events with a mixture of professional pride and existential uncertainty. The Terminus Security Nexus had maintained its perfect record. They had successfully identified and classified every security threat. The fact that one of those threats was a polite human cadet whose weapon was her own mind merely proved that their systems were more sophisticated than anyone had realized. The final irony wasn't lost on him. The Absolute Certainty Scanner, designed to eliminate uncertainty from security assessments, had encountered absolute uncertainty in human form and emerged from the experience with a broader understanding of what certainty actually meant. In trying to classify the unclassifiable, it had discovered that some things were dangerous precisely because they couldn't be predicted or controlled. From across the station, he could hear Cadet Chen explaining basic human tactics to a group of fascinated alien cadets, and their increasingly alarmed responses as they realized that improvise and adapt was considered standard operating procedure rather than a desperate last resort. Zenthkara updated his security logs. Absolute Certainty Scanner operating within expanded parameters. Human personnel, classified as adaptive weapon systems. Recommend diplomatic approach and scientific observation. Do not attempt to debug human nature. After all, some problems were better solved by accepting them as features rather than trying to eliminate them as bugs. It was, he reflected, probably the most human approach to security management he'd ever encountered. The galaxy, he suspected, was about to become a considerably more unpredictable place.